Oh, hey, ladies and gentlemen, didn't see you there. Welcome back to the show. Today we're going to be talking about pollution of various types, and I wanted to read off that less than 1% of the global population lives in areas with safe air pollution levels, according to the WHO. In addition to that, air pollution causes at least 1 in 10 deaths worldwide, amounting to about 7 million premature deaths a year, and air pollution is a greater threat to life expectancy than smoking, HIV, or war, according to my calculations here, according to my sources. Today, I'm joined with Michael Brauer. What's going on? How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for
You
having me.
are you are a professor in the School of Population and Public Health at the University of British Columbia. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
You hold associate appointments in the Division of Respiratory Medicine and the Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability. Correct?
Correct.
All right, and you're currently a Wall Scholar at the Peter Wall Institute for Advanced Studies. Even spent some time in Berkeley and Harvard. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you know your stuff here. So let me just get into the meat of this thing. So you have this global burden of disease studies that you contribute to. You cover a wide range of risk factors and health outcomes. Uh, how does the air pollution interact or exacerbate, risk factors, and what are the implications here for public health?
Yeah, so air pollution's bad for you, primarily for a couple main reasons. One thing is that we all are exposed to it. We can't run, we can't hide. So if you think about something like smoking, we can choose, or even if we can choose to smoke, we can choose not to smoke, or even if we're smoking, we actually can learn how to quit smoking, right? And we can choose what we eat, and all kinds of things. But air pollution, we just have to breathe what's given to us, right? Societally, we can choose, and so everybody's exposed to air pollution, mostly because the things that we do, the way we run our lives, is contributing to that. And so that's sort of one factor. The other factor is that what we're learning, and we've been studying this for 40, 50 years, is that air pollution seems to affect a really wide range of diseases, and in particular, some of the leading killers, in fact, the leading killers. So things like heart disease, strokes, chronic lung disease, lung cancer, diabetes. We're increasingly seeing things like dementia being linked to air pollution. So you put those two things together, and it doesn't mean air pollution is the main cause of those things. Put those two things together, and it's a big deal. So we're seeing now outdoor air pollution somewhere around 5 million deaths, 4 to 5 million deaths every single year from outdoor air pollution. And the other sort of irony of that is that we actually know how to solve this problem. So again, it's not like, we need to find the cure for cancer here. We actually know the cure for air pollution, and we have parts of the world where we've actually more or less implemented, those cures. Places where 50 years ago it was extremely polluted, and it's much, much, much better now.
Yeah. And so what kind of stuff are we talking about? Obviously, it's not just industrial sort of smokestacks putting out stuff, but even the brakes on a car will emit things into the air. What other stuff am I missing here?
Well, so it depends where you are in the world, obviously. So for example, one of the places that's, one of the more polluted parts of the world is South Asia. So India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. And there, a big contributor is actually a form of indoor air pollution, but this also goes out of the home, is actually how people are cooking. And in some cases, how they're, heating water for showering, maybe even heating their home if it's in a colder part of that region. And they're doing that over open fires, perhaps burning wood, burning crop waste, burning animal dung. In a way that, if you're burning wood today in 2024, you're doing it the same way that it was done probably 300-400 years ago. So we're really not, getting any sort of efficiencies in that. And so that we know that that kind of burning is very harmful for the people in the home. But even if you don't do that in your own home and your neighbor does, that is contributing to outdoor air pollution. So something like 20 to 25% of the outdoor air pollution in that part of the world is from that. And again, that's, a solvable problem. Many people most people in high income countries of the world don't cook that way. People in those countries also have aspirations not to cook that way, but that's what's affordable. That's what's accessible to them. So that's one good example. Another thing that many people don't appreciate, which is a big source, is agriculture. And it's a little bit complicated. It's not partly it is sort of the tractors and that kind of thing, but actually we're using fertilizers, and those fertilizers actually cook in the atmosphere and can create air pollution. So we're applying these chemicals, and we need that. We sort of need fertilizers to get the yields that we need to, but we need to think about doing it in a smarter way. And then things like animal waste, all of these actually do, again, through the magic of atmospheric chemistry, contribute to air pollution. And when we have massive agricultural operations, feedlots, large chicken, hog farms, that kind of thing, those are actually really big sources of air pollution. Those are a couple examples. And then the obvious things that people will see, like burning, so power production, industrial sources, our motor vehicles, depending on where you are. And then certainly in countries like the US and Canada, where I am, we're starting to get into things like construction equipment, that or even things like lawnmowers and all of these tiny little sources, restaurants, all these things, places have vents, and this stuff goes up in the air, and we have a lot more people on this planet, and they're all sort of needing these services. These are all things that we are desiring and needing, and collectively that is contributing to the air pollution. So there are many, many sources. And then we're also, as we learn to control those sources, now with climate change, we're seeing in some parts of the world sort of newer problems arising, like where I am in the Pacific Northwest. Wildfires is a huge deal, and also, in parts of Europe and in Australia. So this is really exacerbated. It's not totally due to climate change, but exacerbated by climate change. So as we have dealt in many places with sort of older air pollution problems, now we have new ones that we have to deal with.
Yeah. And for all you listening, he did say animal agriculture. So all you vegans, I'm a vegan myself. Good going. Eat the soy. Don't feed it to the cows. Cut out the middleman, et cetera, et cetera. We're always trying to get the people to stop eating animals, So your work has also forecasted some disease burden scenarios for the future. So what are the predictions, like long-term consequences, air pollution? Do we know a lot? What do we know?
Yeah, so the way to think about forecasting, we have to think about a couple things. So one is the air pollution levels themselves, what's going to happen with them in the future. And the other thing is, what is the health of the population? So one thing that's really important that everybody should know is that, so air pollution itself is not that large of a hazard, but it sort of works in combination with other things. So if we were all incredibly, incredibly healthy, air pollution would not affect us as much as it does. It's because, our physical inactivity, our diet, our, smoking, our alcohol consumption, lack of sleep, stress, on and on and on. Air pollution is kind of another thing that's added on top of that. So when we think about the future, we need to think not just about how air pollution is going to change, but how are we going to be changing? So when we put those two things together, the most important thing, and this is kind of a good news, bad news story, is that we're getting older. So the world is actually getting older. In fact, all the higher income countries of the world, the populations are getting older and older and older. And that's good, right? Like, no problem with that. But what we want is, as people age, to age in a healthy way, right? So, but just that fact of aging, we are seeing that even if air pollution levels stay the way they are today, they stay flat and constant, we're going to see more deaths from air pollution just because people are getting older. and we're not reversing air pollution. We're not cleaning it up as fast as people are aging, right? Like we can't stop the aging, and air pollution, it's a slower process. But also we're starting to see as people are aging and as they're living longer, they're starting to develop more of these diseases that are affected by air pollution. So one of the reasons that, dementia, Alzheimer's disease is becoming more common, it's not because of anything that's actually happening. It's just that people are living long enough to develop those diseases. When I was a kid, everybody in my neighborhood kind of worked till they were 65. And if they were lucky, they lived to 75 when they had a heart attack and died. And that was just the common scenario. I mean, it sounds gruesome, but that's what happened. And now we've been really successful with treating cardiovascular disease. So we're getting lots of people living into their 80s and 90s. And we see, so that, those are just sort of some natural things. But then we're also seeing some problematic things like increases in diabetes. And we just don't have a solution really for that. We can treat diabetes, but we're seeing more and more and more people developing diabetes, diseases related to obesity, physical inactivity, what we sort of call metabolic syndrome. And again, air pollution, it works on that. So it will accelerate the development of those diseases. It will accelerate the worsening of it. We don't think it's, the most important cause, but it makes it worse, makes it more severe. And that's in a worse trend. So we're getting greater proportions of the population alive with these diseases. Mm-hmm. So, but then coming back to, the good news, like what about air pollution itself? For the most part, I think we've peaked in the world. From a global perspective, things are probably as worse as they will get and will start to improve. Certainly, we've seen big improvements throughout most of Western Europe, North America, China. It's been about 10 years now, and still air pollution is high, but it's getting better, and it's getting better every year. And then, like I mentioned, South Asia, so India, for example, in particular, we think air pollution's probably peaked and already started to decline. And so those are the good stories. The question is, will the levels in China, they're still way above the levels in Western Europe or North America. Will it take, 10, 20 years for them to come down to the levels in North America and Western Europe, or will it take 30 or 40 years? And that's really the question. How fast will that happen?
Yeah. And I remember seeing this Chinese skyline completely fogged out by the industrial, whatever it is, very hazy. What are the things that they're implementing in order to cut this down? Because they have tremendously cut down some of that smog.
Yeah, so they've done, for example, much of the Chinese population used to use coal in their homes for heating and for cooking. And that still is happening in some of the more remote rural areas, but certainly in cities and the peripheries of cities, that doesn't happen anymore. So they switched to cleaner sources, again, just like people in higher income settings use. And they used to use a lot of coal burning for power generation. They've been switching slowly, but have been switching to renewables. China is sort of faced with this problem, like India as well, is that sort of as they switch to renewable, cleaner power sources, the demands of power are also increasing as the country develops. So it's becoming wealthier. Right? So they are by far the leading country in the world in terms of percentage, or let's say magnitude of renewable energy. But they need a lot more energy than most countries in the world just because of the population. Cleaner vehicles. Some of the cities in China now have like 20 to 25% electric cars, which is much greater. So there's a few countries like Norway that are global leaders, but that's not common even in many high income countries. So a lot of leapfrogging of technology, a lot of regulations. One of the things, China with a centralized government is very effective at implementing regulations. They get followed. So from an environmental perspective, if they want to do something, they'll do it much more effectively, actually, than many other countries can, because it doesn't get tied up in the court system. It's just a decision. So they've been,
Well,
quite fast. Yeah.
we do sort of been lately having a lot of communists on and praising the ability of centralized government to get things done. Especially when you're talking about making a switch from one type of energy to another, this free market will not be able to make this decision for you. You actually have to kind of force a little bit,
Yeah, to some
right?
extent. I mean, there's also there is a misnomer that, environmental protection is sort of antithetical to economic development, and that's just absolutely not true. So we've just seen many, many, many examples of that. So it isn't an either or, but I think the speed at which a strong government actually, for better or worse, we're not going to get into all the politics here, but strong government action, regulation. That is what's successful, and that's been what's successful in the West. So California, really kind of a leading economy in terms of environmental protection, and they've just set up regulations that really force new technologies. So the cars that we have today, it's because of those regulations, and they just told the car manufacturers, "You figure out how to do this,"
Yeah.
and they did it. And so that is kind of the model that we've seen, and it works.
Yeah. You could do it with capitalism. Say, here's some incentives to do it, but make sure you do it and do it within the bounds of what we need as humanity. How about Canada as far as how are they on that same tip?
Well, Canada is, I think it's a much easier country because of the population densities. I mean, we have cities that are, like any other cities, but the country as a whole, the population density is fairly low. It's a little bit, I think the main difference, let's say, between Canada and the US is just it's a little bit less of a litigious kind of environment. We don't have the lawsuits. So instead of what tends to happen in the US is sort of you have two positions, there may be a decision, gets tied up in the courts, and at the end of the day, something, in between often gets implemented. Canada kind of does that discussion more outside of the courts, but it is more of a collective. Actually, industry sits down with government and with environmental groups, with citizens, and says, kind of what can you like the question is like, what can you do? And industry will say, yeah, we can do this much, and everybody's like, yeah, we'll agree to do that as long as it's improving, that kind of thing. So the kind of analysis, so it's a little bit of a different system, but depending on the particular situation, there's really, no example that 100% one of those works better than the other. U.S. system sometimes works better than the Canadian one, sometimes the opposite. Both countries, have improved their air quality, dramatically. Again, they're also both countries, and particularly the West, is sort of facing this wildfire problem, and that's going to dominate the issue in North America. That's kind of the future of air quality in North America is wildfire smoke, in part because we've been really successful with those other sources. We don't burn a lot of coal anymore. Our cars are pretty clean. We've outsourced a lot of our industry, for better or worse. They're, again, good or bad. We've outsourced a lot of that to countries in Asia, especially. And so they're dealing with some of the pollution that we might normally have here. But we also implemented, the industry that we do have, we've also implemented a lot of technology. So we actually we can make stuff, we can generate electricity without producing a lot of pollution. Again, that's where technology comes in.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a shame that in America we are more of the corporations just tell us what they're going to do, and we have to sort of kind of fight them about it. But talking to you, I'm a little bit more optimistic, so I appreciate that.
Yeah,
So
it is an optimistic story. You work in this area, you have to be optimistic. And if you look at the data, air quality today, it's nothing like it was when I was a kid. We used to burn trash. That's not allowed, in most places. Cars were, way more polluting, than they are today. There was a coal plant, coal burning power plant where I grew up, that doesn't exist anymore. So all these things make a difference.
Yeah. Do you ever get your faith in humanity a bit shaken from having to study what you study?
Again, I tend to remain optimistic. I think sometimes the only frustrating part for me is especially something like climate change. So I'll give you the example of wildfire smoke. I've been studying that issue for more than 20 years. We had all these projections. They weren't perfect, but we knew the climate's already warming. We know this is going to happen with fires. And I'm sitting here 20 years later, and yeah, now there's more attention to it, but we had 20 years to kind of get ready for this and start to really face it. And this is human nature. We tend to wait until it's staring us in the face. And what I mean by staring us in the face is we've actually had some bad examples, where people are dying, where we see, whole cities, again, like things like, Major League Baseball games where you can't see the baseball because there's fire smoke there. And we knew this was going to happen. So it's just a little bit surreal, to be studying it and then sort of seeing what you projected for the future. But no, I think these are all solvable problems. Some, it's a matter of priorities. We're actually, even though we do a lot of stupid things as humans, we're actually pretty resourceful and pretty smart. So our history is that we face challenges and we do solve them. It's just a matter of, how many kind of bumps in the road. So yeah, I am optimistic.
That makes me feel better. That not only do you know what you're talking about and you're putting your whole life towards doing something incredible for humanity, but that you are optimistic about it too. That's very nice. I appreciate that. Made my day.
Yeah.
But you've been around. This is my last question. You've conducted a lot of research in various parts of the world. Can you give us an example of some of the more exotic and interesting places that you've been and the methods that you use to get the samples? How do you get these samples?
Yeah, so now things have changed a lot. Like for example, now we use a lot of satellite information, so I don't actually have to go across the world to collect a sample. But I was mentioning to you before, this issue of what are people doing in their homes, and so we did a study. Where we collected samples in about 6,000 different homes in about 12 or 13 different countries around the world, where we had people wearing tiny little monitors that would collect a sample of air pollution. At the same time, the monitors connected to a cell phone, and we could sort of tell whether that sample was being collected properly and if there was a problem. So I would get, an email every night sort of saying, these 50 samples were collected, 48 of them were good, so that I could then, phone somebody on the field team in that community. And this could be a remote community, in Bangladesh. And I could say, sample blah, blah, wasn't collected properly. Can you resample that person? Essentially what we're doing is we're sucking air through a filter, that filter then gets sent back to our laboratory. We weigh it, we analyze it for chemistry, we put it all in a database, and then we can look at characteristics like what are they burning, what how many family members, was the woman in the household more highly exposed than the man because she might be doing more of the cooking. All of these kinds of things, and it just helps us understand the problem and helps us look at solutions. And then in some cases we may follow up and ask people questions. So one of our studies in India, one of the advantages if you are cooking with a more modern stove, or one of the perceived advantages, is it can be faster. So you don't have to light a fire, you don't have to clean up, like you and I, we flip on a switch. Seems great. And so we often promote sort of the time saving, but then, we ask the women, if you had like another hour in your day, what would you do? And some NGOs will like to say, well, we can give these women more time and they'll start micro businesses and it'll be great for, the women's Saturday sleep, which is fine, right? They need more sleep. But it wasn't going to like generate a new economy or something. So that was a message that, probably isn't going to translate very well to that population. We need to think about other ways to help them and help, even their local governments support these initiatives. And maybe it's the health argument. Maybe it's the fact that they're not deforesting the land around them to collect firewood. All of these things. So we try and understand, what's going on from the perspective of the individual, and let's say that local situation. And so all of this kind of, all of this work sort of helps us understand that and identify the most appropriate solutions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so fascinating. And that's great that you can do it remotely, send them the devices, collect the air samples, give us the data, send it back. Time saver. Boom. Progress.
Yeah, we never would have been able to do this. If I had to send teams of people, and we did have, people we were collaborating with locally, but if I had to send sort of, highly trained staff, and we even developed devices that we knew people could use without a lot of training. We had YouTube videos that people could watch. But if I had to send like teams of 20 people around the world, it would have taken me 10 years to do this. And so we're trying to, use innovation in science and research and data and, all the things that we rely on, cell phones and the internet to, make this easier and make it faster. And we're very successful. So we can really get information, much more quickly now than we were able to before.
Yeah, and it's stereotypical that it's almost impossible or very difficult to the whole navigating of grant money and receiving funding for science. So if you can cut your costs, you're doing good. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the program and shining a little bit of light on what's going on with the air pollution. Michael Brauer, professor over there, British Columbia, University of British Columbia. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
I should also add a shout out to University of Washington because I also have a position there, and a lot of this global work comes out of there as well.
He's moonlighting, folks. He's everywhere at once. Well, we're gonna cut it there. Stick around. I want to talk to you right after, and we'll say, everybody, try to cut down your air pollution, please. You're killing us all. See you guys next time.